was no transparency in the Labour Party. We were 100% right to say that. We talked about the gas tax. How was it that the price of oil was dropping, yet the price at the pump was not increasing, going down? So where was the money going? And very soon, I'll be presenting a report to the House to show you who got the money.
And I remember when we figured out what the government was doing, which is basically overcharging. So they had a surplus tax, and persons were not understanding it. And there were two particular people, Mr. Jean-Marie being one of them, defending the government's position and telling us, well, you know, the people are paying the money, but the money is just
going to the government,
going to somewhere else.
Yes, that's what you were saying. Yeah,
nonsense. And you're 100% right. And you're a historian.
Yeah,
and there are many more examples of situations.
The government of St. Lucia has announced plans to review the price and tax on fuel in St. Lucia. Prime Minister Alan Chastanet claims that the move is aimed at securing savings for consumers and the state. However, the disclosure in the House of Assembly on Tuesday may have put to rest claims made on the campaign trail in 2016 regarding surplus revenue. Colby DeVoe reports.
Prime Minister Alan Chastanet, who delivered a summary report to Parliament on Tuesday, announcing government's plans to conduct a comprehensive study to review the fuel pricing regime, made an instructive revelation. The head of government placed specific emphasis on the formula for calculating the imported customs, insurance and freight costs in the overall fuel price pass-through mechanism. The presentation was a far cry from the days of the Orange March of January 2015, when Chastanet, as then political leader of the United Workers' Party, led a demonstration through the streets of Castries, accusing the SLP administration of raking in a $6.80 profit on every gallon of petrol sold, despite emphatic denials that this was not the case. Nearly 6 years later, an apparent subtle concession from now Prime Minister Alan Chastanet on where exactly the money was going.
So we now know where the money was going. Government was getting its $2.50, but the excess amount was going to the importers. So you would have a situation, Mr. Speaker, in which the price of fuel was dropping, the price at the pump was not dropping, and the difference was not going to the public, but the difference was going to the wholesalers. And I want to make it very clear the wholesalers were not doing anything wrong. So this is not to lay fault in any way to the wholesalers, but this was the system that we had. And the inefficiency of the system was extremely exposed by these extremes. The extreme of a 3-month adjustment period, and also by the extreme of the drops in the CIF prices over that same period.
In the face of a global oil price shock, the pass-through mechanism based on market forces was first introduced by the Stephenson King-led UWP administration in September 2009, which adjusted the prices monthly. But the Dr. Kenny Anthony government in 2012, citing the need for breathing space for hard-hit sectors in a down economy, revised the regulatory timeframe to 3 months. However, in 2014, the opposition United Workers' Party demanded relief at the pumps, arguing that the high cost of fuel did not reflect the international price of oil, which hit a 4.5-year low in November that year. This was the premise of the Enough is Enough Orange March in 2015, where the UWP requested that anyone feeling the pinch from VAT, utility bills, bus fares and gas prices join the cause.
This is the period in which we had the famous Orange March, which many members in this House have referred to on several occasions. And the fact is that what existed was where there was an approved excise tax of $2.50. But because of the dropping in the price of the fuel, the question became, where was the difference going? I think that was the biggest question that everyone was asking. And there were members in the private sector, who shall remain nameless, who kept on saying, well, this is going to deal with averaging out. But nonetheless, where was the money going?
The price at the pumps would fall in 2015 due to geopolitical factors, and the 3-week period of adjustment which prevails today was adopted. It should be noted that the then SLP administration maintained that there was no hidden costs, explaining that the cost of fuel was a tabulation of the base CIF, excise tax, service charge, landed costs, and the company margin.
I watched the Prime Minister on Tuesday in the House giving a full explanation of the fuel pass-through mechanism. And I think in the process he unwittingly debunked the claim that he made 5 years ago that the government of St. Lucia then had imposed a hidden tax of $6.80 under the 3-month revision period. And in reading the text, which is clearly a prepared text from the ministerial officials of the Ministry of Finance, he went on to say, quite surprisingly, that he was making the statement that they perceive reduction or savings that should have been reflected in the price of fuel at the pumps back then did in fact go to the importers of fuel as opposed to the government of St. Lucia. And I remember at the time making the point that it was the case that government was in no way receiving any additional benefit than the excise tax that was stipulated in the SI, and that there was no hidden tax, and the perceived savings that consumers were not realizing at the pumps was in fact going to the importers. But they persisted with it and even had a march about it and went further to calculate that it was $6.80. And today, in a different environment, because I think you will have to wonder why is he providing such a full and detailed explanation. And I only think it's a pretext to provide some basis for allowing a third operator into the market. But that's another story. And this whole idea about trying to get savings for consumers regarding the price of fuel doesn't wash, because there's nothing wrong with the fuel pass-through mechanism. It's one which was recommended by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And the whole idea at the time was to stabilize government revenue, because prior to that, what you had was a situation where government had adopted a policy of trying to encourage stable prices for inflation reasons. And you had a situation where prices were going up on the world market, that the government had to reduce its level of taxation, which meant they had to do it for less revenue to keep prices stable. That cost governments quite a bit of money, and the ECCB recommended that, look, you need to adopt a different policy to try and secure revenue, and then they came up with the fuel pass-through mechanism, which has been in place in most of the OECS countries. The issue that gave rise to much of the debate when prices were coming down and it wasn't being reflected at the pumps was that you had a revision period of 3 months. So it was quite a lag before you could recognize, consumers can realize any savings at the pump. And that has been addressed by reducing the revision period to 3 weeks, so that you have very little movement between orders in terms of prices. And that's sort of the issue. So right now, fuel prices at the pumps are more reflective of market changes, all market prices internationally. So there's nothing wrong with the system. And I think the Prime Minister owes the public an apology, because he was vociferous in his claim that there was a hidden tax of $6.80. When you think about it, it's just impossible to have a hidden tax. Government doesn't handle the product. All it has is a stipulated excise tax, which is by a statutory instrument, and there is no way you could have a hidden tax. And yet they persisted in that for so long and had people believe it, and they marched the streets. And today he's now claiming that this perceived, in fact, to use his words, people who were worrying where the savings were going to, and now we know it was going to the importers and not the government. I think he owes the public an apology.